Speaking to you today is Dr. Marilyn Jager Adams. She is currently a visiting scholar at Harvard University. She received her doctorate from Brown University. She is the author of Beginning to Read, Thinking and Learning About Print, and was commissioned by the United States Congress to explain why so many children were having difficulty with reading. She also contributed to the writing of the program advisory, Teaching Reading, and presently she serves as the Vice President of the American Educational Research Association, and this past year received the association's Sylvia Scribner Award for Outstanding Achievement in Education for the past 10 years. On the lighter side, she serves as the Literacy Advisor for the new Sesame Street program for 4 to 8-year-olds, Between the Lion, and serves as a consultant to the Top Gun program in designing the cockpit for readability of control panels.
What I want to do today is give you a sense of the scientific journey and the lessons that it brings us without burying you in technical detail. I guess maybe before I get into it today, maybe I'll just drop this thought on you about science. I think one of the truly irritating paradoxes of life is that when science finally does come up with a correct answer, it's exciting for about 10 minutes, maybe even bewildering. And after that, it's so obvious. You wonder why anyone had to discover it. I mean, gravity? They never spilled anything. So I think you'll find the same's true of our recent progress in reading. It may make you extremely uncomfortable for a moment or two until you get your head around it. But after that, I think you'll find that it seems just plain sensible. I think you'll find that all kinds of things that you've noticed over your lifetime about reading, about children, and that you'd stuck in that corner or that closet will begin to come together and fit together and make sense for you. Okay, so this is an outline of basically what I'm going to try and get through with you today. And let's start with a problem with phonics. In fact, why don't we start with the basics, the alphabet. English is essentially an alphabetic language. That is, the letters represent, the symbols represent elementary speech sounds, right? Definition of an alphabet. The invention of the alphabet has been hailed as the most intellectually liberating invention in the social history of the world. Historian David Dieringer refers to it as a people's script, in contrast with the theocratic scripts that preceded it. After all, a language can express limitless numbers of ideas, right? Hundreds of thousands of words. English probably has 5,000 syllables. But no language in the world has more than a few dozen basic speech sounds, a few dozen phonemes. Because of that, the number of symbols in an alphabetic language is very few enough for almost anyone to memorize. And having memorized them, to be able to speak or read or write any speakable expression in the language. But this is only so if the person understands the logic of the alphabetic system, right? That the symbols represent phonemes. It's, of course, that logic that phonics is intended to teach, and here's a puzzle for you to mull. How can it be that the alphabet is so very, very right if phonics is so arguably wrong? Okay, over the years, there have been, well, let's see. In fact, for hundreds and thousands of years, for centuries after the alphabet was invented, the appropriateness of phonics instruction wasn't even questioned. In the Middle Ages, for example, the church decided that everybody ought to learn to read. They wanted everyone to be able to participate in the liturgy, a great, big, universal literacy campaign. So how did they do it? Simple. They taught the alphabet, and on that basis alone, people were expected to be able to read everything, all that they would ever need to read. And evidently they did, or at least I can't find any complaints in history books that anyone had any difficulty. Impressive, right? But here's the catch. There really was hardly anything for people to read, right? There weren't newspapers, books, weather reports, no homework of that kind, no paper, no print. So what the church wanted them to read consisted generally exactly and only of the Lord's Prayer, the Credo, a couple of Psalms, 10 Commandments. Okay, that's it. All of which were hand-printed or carved on a nice little slab of wood or metal for handy reference. Nobody failed. What do you think? Were they reading? Then one day, Mr. Gutenberg invented his printing press, and we had a whole new game, right? Here in America, with the Protestant Revolution, the number one goal was to get everybody to read not just prayers, but the whole Bible, right? So we taught people the letters. Being enlightened, we also taught them the sounds of the letters. And guess what? Many people still couldn't do it. Why? Why was it hard? These people knew everything they needed to know, right? Or so we thought. What could be the problem? We gave them the Bible, they knew the letters, they knew the sounds, and in the beginning was the word. The answer, we decided, had to be blending, right? Blending. For some reason, people were having trouble blending the sounds together. No problem, we decided we would just teach them to blend. Cognitive revolution, 1960s. People, we argued, do not just receive and respond to the information in the world. Instead, they select it, they filter it, they augment it, they interpret it, they, all in accordance with their own personal beliefs, goals, and understandings. Right then, right at the outset of the cognitive revolution, there appeared a book called Understanding Reading by a man named Frank Smith, who was at the time a graduate student at Harvard. Smith argued that English spelling sound correspondences were much too messy for people to be able to read left to right, letter by letter. In addition, he pointed out that if reading involved translating letters to sounds, letter by letter by letter, then people would never be able to read fast enough. Human memory, he pointed out, was limited to 7 plus or minus 2 items. If you read letter by letter or word by word, your head would get full before you got to the end of most words, much less sentences. And on top of that, he argued that if readers attended to the spellings of words instead of the meanings, they would never, ever understand the text. So Smith concluded, I want to see the bottom of that next view graph, just the bottom quote. He said that to the fluent reader, the alphabetic principles completely irrelevant. This is his inference. The fluent reader identifies every word, if he identifies words at all, as an ideogram. He is probably not concerned with the sounds of words in the first place. And if he does read aloud or subvocalize, it's because he has already identified the words. Made sense. In addition, he concluded, he argued that, can I have the next slide, the top quote? No, the next, yeah. Reading, this was his main conclusion, reading is a process in which, the very first quote up there, in which the reader picks and chooses from the available information only enough to select and predict a language structure which is decodable to meaning. It is not a process of sequential word recognition. Okay, this is the premise, this is the theory on which, with which we're still arguing today, okay? We're trying to get it to go to bed now, and it's hard, right? There we have it, this book, given, he argued also that this is what kids should be taught to do. If this is what grown-ups do, then clearly there's no gain in getting kids to pay attention to the letter sounds, and in fact there may be great cost because you're diverting them from the level that they really do need to pay attention to. So this book, given to us 25 years ago, in the end was singularly responsible for both the whole language movement and for the research that now challenges its basic precepts. Then as we moved into the 1980s, computer-mediated eye movement technologies became available. Finally, we had a way to prove ourselves correct. But again, things didn't work out that way. Could I have the next slide, Jer? Here, this is, slide it up. This is some output from some data from a computer it's a Carnegie Mellon graduate student reading the text. The text is, flywheels are one of the oldest mechanical devices known to man. Every internal combustion engine, blah, blah. Above the text, you see two sets of numbers. The locations of the numbers show where in the text the reader paused his eyes as he read, okay? The top set of numbers shows the order in which he paused his eyes in those locations. Those are the little numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the numbers underneath that show the duration, how long they dwelt their eyes in each of those spots. So those are in milliseconds. So the first one is basically 1.5 seconds, 1,500 milliseconds, or 1.5 seconds, and then a quarter second, and 400 seconds, okay? Now, this is an extremely typical eye movement recording from good readers reading for meaning. And I guess I'd just like to ask you a couple questions about this. Do the readers skip any words? Do they skip very many words? Which words do they skip? The articles, the little function words, the short words. And it's not just any short word. They don't skip words like ed and Oz. What do they do with the hard words? Do they skip those? No, they don't. They skip nary a hard word. Instead, what do? They give it the extra time they need. They give it a lot of extra time. In fact, there are basically two spots that the readers give extra time. One is the head nouns or the subject nouns of the sentence, set themselves up to understand, right? And the other is these long and infrequent words. Okay, again, this pattern of results has been replicated again and again and again at this point. This particular recording is from 1980. It's now 1995. We can't break it, okay? Number of different laboratories, a huge number of different people. Skillful readers proceed through text, line by line, left to right, word by word. Where the text is easier or the context is stronger, they spend less time on each word. But when reading for meaning, they still fixate very nearly each and every word of text, and certainly all the content words, the hard words, they certainly fixate. Interesting, huh? Well, our mind was blown. This was very difficult. No doubt many of you find these data very surprising, maybe even unbelievable. I can tell you firsthand that's how we felt about them too. We in the research community, that is, but we have had 25 years to deal with them. You guys only have about 25 minutes, right? It was not easy, but as these data just kept piling up, eventually researchers gave in. If the data were not wrong, then somehow the theory had to be. We were eventually forced to rethink the theory. This model that has enabled us to teach computers how to recognize speech, fingerprints, cancer tumors, sonar signatures. This model, okay? This is serious business. Anyway, let's check this thing out one more time. It's probably obvious to you that the meaning and the print has to be part of the word recognition process, right? Has to be part of the reading process. Got to look at the print. You got to get the meanings. But if you look at this diagram, you can see that the pronunciations of the words are built right in there, right at the core. Why? Two reasons. First, without the pronunciations, the circle's broken. You need that circle. You need everybody holding hands to get that automaticity, that instantaneity. Second, and this is more subtle, the pronunciations of a word are critical for learning the identities and orders of its letters. Think about it for a minute. There's really very little in the meaning of a word that gives that away. But because our writing system is fundamentally alphabetic, pronunciations can. They help you remember which letters go in that word and what their order is. They can and they do. This was the second huge surprise of all this work. Skillful readers instantly, automatically, irrepressibly translate print to speech as they read. We've affirmed this now through reams and tomes of research. ranging not only from these kinds of performance studies, but also to brain imaging studies. And you know what else? Not only do skillful readers take in the full spellings of the words they read and map them to speech sounds, but being a good reader depends critically, indispensably, on being able to do this. It's not an either or, that reading involves recognizing the print, mapping it to language, but of course, right, text is language. This isn't to do with sounding out, this is to do with the fact that text is language, right? It not only is it, I mean, it's parasitic on language in the beginning, but beyond that, it truly is part of your language system. Learning to read changes your vocabulary, it changes the way you use language, it changes the way you think with language, right? And meanings. I mean, they all have to do with it all, and they're all interactive, of course they are. And it's not strategic. Strategies are what, skills are what you do when you just open your key and walk in your house, right? You don't even have to think about your key. Strategies are what you do when you forget your key. All right. So, but here's the problem. We've now established that being a good reader depends absolutely unforgivably on having deep, ready knowledge of spellings, and the spelling-sound correspondences of words. And also that not having this knowledge, holes in this knowledge, translates without fail into reading difficulties. Okay, the implication is then that spellings and spelling-sound correspondences must be something that children need to learn. Back to phonics, right? And back to the problem of its iffy effectiveness. So, phonics. Jerry, can I have the next slide? Imagine that you have a little one who walks into your first grade classroom and has basically no leg up on this reading challenge at all, okay? You can sit this little one down and you can teach him the letters. No problem, right? Not a big deal. You can also teach him the sounds of those letters. Again, that's not a problem. Not a big deal. And I don't know, by mid-year anyway, you should be able to give them, next slide. I'm sorry, what I've moved into, you're right. What I've moved into is number 3, phonemic awareness. We're gonna get down to here, okay? This is gonna be the answer to the iffy effectiveness of phonics. Little advanced organizing, right? Okay, so you have this little one, you've taught him the letters, you've taught him the letter sounds, and by mid-year anyway, maybe January, you can give him simple words like this and say, okay, now I'd like you to sound it out. And the little one will do it for you, right? Ba-I-ga. And you say, terrific, that's wonderful. Now, what I'd like you to do is blend it together. Blend it together. Ba-I-ga. You say, okay. Say it fast. Ba-I-ga. It's a familiar problem, isn't it? And what's the problem here? Blending. Just like with the hornbook and the primers and the spellers. But now we have a different take on this. Blending, we realize now, is not the problem. Instead, an inability to blend is a symptom. It's a symptom that the child does not understand that the sounds that go with the letters are meant to be the sounds, the sub-sounds of his or her own speech. Blending is a sign that they learned it, but they didn't understand it. The inability to blend, in other words, is a symptom that the child does not have what is called phonemic awareness. And there we have it, the reading buzzword of the decade, right? What is phonemic awareness? Okay, phonemes are those little sounds that go with the letters, right? The B that goes with B and the S that goes with S, okay? In a nutshell, phonemic awareness is the insight, the eureka, the aha, that spoken words can be thought of as a sequence of these little sounds, okay? Just that you can think of spoken words that way. Now, what if a child has never even noticed the phonemes in his or her own speech? Will that child be able to learn the letter sounds when we teach him? Sure, right? No problem. B says ba, S says s, cow says moo, dog says woof. You know, it's not a problem. Train says choo-choo. Kids are really, really good at learning this kind of stuff, whether or not it makes sense. I mean, they're built for it, right? But they won't realize that these little sounds, the b, the s, the k, are meant to be little slices of their own speech. If they've never noticed these sounds in their own speech, then they won't recognize these sounds as speech. They'll just learn them as noises, right? Not as speech sounds. And if the letters are just regular old noises, then there's no way that they're going to link up with each other or to the child's language, to the child's knowledge of language, right? No blending. Ba-aga. 3 separate honks. That's all. That's the problem. Now, why is phonemic awareness so difficult? Why is it that some people just seem to fail to notice the phonemes? Now, all of you, no doubt, are good readers. So all of you surely have fine awareness of phonemes. And I'd just like to ask you some questions about this word then. Some nice phonemic awareness questions, some nice Hollyhock questions. What's the first sound of the word bag? Good. What's the last sound of the word bag? Great. How many sounds in the word bag? Good. Sound it with me. Good. Great. Right? Can I have the next picture? One of you who was really good at it, what this is a sound spectrograph. It's a picture of the sound of the word bag. And what I'd like you to do is tell me from this, instead of it spelling, exactly how many sounds there are in this word. Can you tell me where the first one begins and this ends and the second one begins?
Where the first one begins.
Can you point to where on this graph the b stops and the a starts? Get a wise ass up here in the front row. Okay. Here is the first reason why phonemic awareness is hard, right? Acoustically speaking, phonemes don't exist. There are no cracks between the phonemes, right? There's no first, second, or third sound in the word bag. It's just one big ballistic utterance. Bag, right? But really, it's worse than that. It's not just that there are no cracks between the phonemes, okay? It's also the case that the phonemes overlap in time because of the way you make them with your mouth, so that they never quite sound the same from one context to another. I'd like you to prove this to yourself with a fine Orton-Gillingham phoneme, right? S, the sound of S. We use it first because it can be said in isolation, right? S. Okay, now I'd like you to make that as though you're working with a little one who's having a lot of trouble. You're trying to make very clear to this little one how to make the sound, how to clarify the sound, how to get him to repeat the sound. Okay, next, working with the same little one, I want you to say the word see so as to convey to that child that this word begins with the very same sound. Ready? See. And now the word so. So. Can you hear the S in all those 3 words? See. So. Okay? When you're doing this, can you feel your mouth stretching to a smile before you ever even begin that S on C? Pursing to an O before you ever start that S on so? They are different sounds. They're just plain different sounds. Now, S is very long, very distinctly affricated, and so it bears more similarity to itself across context than any of the other letter sounds. But not even S. They're just different sounds every place they occur. So here's the second reason why phonemic awareness is difficult. The way phonemes sound in real speech don't fall into those nice, neat little categories labeled by the letters. When you say, listen to the B and Barbie, Big Bird, and Bobby Bonilla, well, I mean, that's a lot of different buzz, it turns out. Okay, how many of you have seen or encouraged inventive spelling in your schools or classrooms? Could I see that next little picture? Think about how a beginner might spell the word truck, right? Truck. Isn't it there, Jer? Sticking. Okay. Truck, right? You guys have all seen all these kinds of things, right? Forget the ones in the bottom, right? Truck, 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 truck. Now you can mark these as wrong. These are kids who, what's happening here? Why did they shift from the T to the J to the G to the CH to the DJ, whatever? I want you to say the word T and tree and compare the T sound in the beginning of each. You feel that ch, that psh, okay? These kids are kids who have phonemic awareness. They are very well tuned. They're picking up that sound. They're just groping around for which of the letters of the alphabet are, it's not exactly a T, it's not exactly a CH, it's, how are we going to do this, right? They just can't figure out which of the letters to use for this ch sound. That's what we see in the inventive spelling for the kids who have phonemic awareness and the confidence and analytic stance to be able to grope around for it. But just think what this kind of mess does for the child who does not have phonemic awareness, right? It's tough. So, am I saying the phonemes don't exist? No, phonemes do exist. They exist both formally, they go with our letters, and psychologically. They live in our minds. But they're not defined by the way they sound. They're defined motorically by the articulatory gestures, by the way we make them. There is an ideal way to make a B for a B or a S for an S. It's just that you slap them around when you're running through speech. The problem is the kids aren't terribly likely to discover this on their own. Kids need to be encouraged to make the sounds and play with them and compare them and explore their nature. That's what a lot of this phonemic awareness training is. It's getting them to, you can't hear them. You got to play with them. You got to find them. You got to build these categories. And they got to match the ones that we've marked with our letters. We've taken this messy speech continuum and said, okay, we're going to call these a T, and these a B, and these a C. And now we got to let the kids know that this is our system. Okay, so far, two reasons why phonemic awareness is hard. First, no cracks between the phonemes. Second, the sound of each phoneme is variable, right? There's also a third, more basic reason that it's hard, and that is that in normal speaking and listening, and this is the hardest part, in normal speaking and listening, it is neither natural nor normal to pay attention to the way the phonemes sound, to what your tongue is doing. In normal speaking and listening, you're supposed to be paying attention to the meaning and message of what you're hearing or what you're saying, right? Let me give you a concrete example. Jerry, do you have that thing that says red, green, blue, yellow, purple? Okay. So this is a test that was originally, no, you can peel them off one at a time, okay? The guy wanted to know if the kids were aware of words. Since to listen to a sentence, you have to get all the words and scrunch them, okay? These were preschoolers, and this task has been done till all the yeah buts have been worked out. But here's basically the idea. He sat the kids down with a bunch of toys on the table, like a toy giraffe, a toy zebra, and a toy horse, and named them and asked the kids how many. Zebra, giraffe, horse, how many? Right? And once they knew how to play that game perfectly, no mistakes, these are little ones, right? He moved to more abstract things like colored blocks and colored pieces of paper, and finally he said, we don't need the toys to play this game, we can just do it with words. So he sat them down and said, all right, red, green, blue, yellow, white, black. How many? How many? Yes. Can we see if they're right? Just a little one, just a little bitty. Ta-da! All right, now pay attention, would you? Then after they got that, he moved to more complicated lists of words. Like this one, Mary and John went walking. How many? Good. You're precocious. There are two there. There's Mary went walking, Mary went jogging and 90s, Mary went walking and John went walking. When you listen to language, you listen for the idea units. You listen for the thoughts. You listen for what it's communicating, okay? Now, kids very gradually progress to being able to break sentences into words. They break up the subject and predicate next, and even when they're into the primary grades, they tend to be very, very reluctant to cede word status to those nasty little function words like in and of and to. But if you think about it, that's really arbitrary. There's no real good reason why have should be a word when ing is not, right? It's just, at some point, language has to say, all right, these are the words. Okay, so 3 reasons. No cracks between the phonemes. They sound different every place you hear them. And third, it is neither natural or normal to attend to phonemes when speaking or listening. If we want kids to attend to the sounds of speech, and we do, then it's incumbent upon us to engage them in activities that makes that fun and interesting, right? So they can fool with them and play with them. We've always had these activities in our preschool rooms because we knew they were fun for kids. They're Willoughby, Wallaby, Woo, and Down by the Sea, and I'm a Little Teapot, and who knows what else. And now all we're saying is, it's not just that they're fun, but look around for the sparkle in the eye. Watch those kids who aren't having any fun and don't get the games, and can't make the rhymes, and can't Willoughby, Wallaby, Wasselin, and help them learn how to play. It's fun for the kids because it's cognitively challenging, and it's also very important for their language development. Research has shown over and over again that helping kids develop phonemic awareness pays off big in the ease and speed with which they learn to read and write. Okay, I'm down to number 4, success in first grade. How important is it? What's so important about teaching all this stuff early? Won't they eventually get it anyway? What's the push? Here's the answer. I'd like to see the contingency table from Connie Jewell. This is, don't get to see Connie in Ontario. I thought I should bring some of her data, as we say in New England, with me. Okay, this is from a longitudinal study that Connie did with her colleagues Priscilla Griffith and Phil Goff. And what she did was she followed a bunch of kids from the beginning of first grade to the end of 4th grade. There were 54 kids who were still there by the end of 4th grade. And if you look across the rows, you see that there were 30 kids who were good readers at the end of 1st grade and 24 who were poor. Okay? If you look down the columns, that just shows that 25 were poor readers at the end of 4th grade, 29 were good ones. Now, the nice thing about this graph is if you look at the upper right-hand corner, can you point to that, the little upper right-hand square, Jer? Yeah. What that shows is that the vast majority of children who were good readers at the end of 1st grade were still good readers at the end of 4th grade. This is good, right? We like this, right? Super. If we look at the lower left-hand square, what we see is that the majority of the children who were poor readers at the end of 1st grade were still poor readers at the end of 4th grade. We do not like this, right? This breaks our heart. And this basic phenomenon is shown over and over again in the Chapter 1 studies, which are huge samples, follow-through studies, the big British studies, the NICHD longitudinal studies. 1st grade reading is found over and over again to be a singularly powerful predictor, not just of later reading achievement, but of later school achievement across the board, of later aptitude tests, of whether or not kids drop out of school or get into trouble. 1st grade reading is incredibly important. Why is it so important? One, as John is pointing out, knowing how to read is critical, right, to all school subjects. But the other one is that 1st grade is the child's. In 1st grade, a child is not only, it's not only his introduction, the child's introduction to school, but it's the child's introduction to herself or himself as a student, right? When they can't read, I mean, they all walk in saying, oh, I'm tough stuff, I'm 6, I'm big, I'm going to school, I'm going to learn to read. And then by this time of year, by October or November, you can lean on anybody's door jamb and say, okay, that one, and that one aren't getting it. I can tell because they're already getting antsy, okay? Pretty soon, by March, I mean, they're 6. What are the options? I'm stupid, school's stupid, reading's stupid, Mrs. Adams stupid, I don't like to read, I don't like to read anyway. I mean, these are not good responses in a 6-year-old, right? In fact, in this particular study with Jewell, Griffith, and Goff, in 4th grade, they did an attitude survey, and they found that the 4th grade poor readers reported as a group that they hated to read. On a multiple choice test, they reported that they would rather clean their rooms than read. These are 9-year-olds. They'd rather clean their rooms than read. One kid wrote in that he'd rather clean the mold off the edge of the bathtub than read. Well, very quickly, here we have, across the years, because of this strong phenomenon of how well children read in first grade being such a strong predictor of how well they read later, people across the century have done incredible amounts of work trying to figure out which kids would and would not have trouble when they got into first grade. This is just a handful of the various things that people have hypothesized make a difference. On this list, for those of you who can't see it, are, for example, the child's IQ, mental age, perceptual motor skills, perceptual styles, perceptual speed, preferred modalities, handedness, gender, dialect, race, parental income, parental education. People have studied all these things. I know that there is great trepidation about studying these things, lest these be imperfect predictors and we sort kids wrongly. But the alternative is to wait until they failed, which is too tragic, if you can keep kids from failing. In any case, only under the careful lens of research have we learned that, you know which one of these is the best predictor? Is a good predictor? None. Each of these is at best a very weak or remote predictor of how well children do. By weak, I mean it picks up almost none of the variance, which is true of IQ and mental age. By remote, I mean that it may be associated with something that does make a difference, but it in itself does not. Through the same research, we have come up with several direct causal factors, things that directly do influence beginning reading. And again, I don't want to say this is the complete list. This is the challenge of developmental research now, to find out what else goes on this list. But we're sure these things belong there. On this list, the first thing is the kids' letter knowledge. You know, can they sing them, say them, recognize them, write them, whatever. Thousands of ways to measure, but are they comfortable with the letters, right? Second is the category of linguistic awareness, which includes this business of phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is what we've been talking about here, and phonemic awareness in different studies is shown to pick up over half the variance in how well kids do in first grade. It's very important. It's important, clearly knowing the letters is important. They're just, you know, they weren't designed for a crash course. These are, right? You might as well give the kids lots of time to play with them. But phonemic awareness is what makes the whole system make sense. If you haven't noticed that the sounds in language, none of it makes sense. And then the third thing is knowledge about print. This is picked up through, for example, the non-phonics questions, the non-letter questions on Marie Clay's concepts about print tests, for example. They're their tests. And it's things like, do the kids know the front from the back of the book? Do they know which way to turn the pages? These things seem pretty easy to you. The reason they're good predictors is because so many children in our country cannot answer these questions. Okay? This is very important. All right. So, phonemic awareness. Why is phonemic awareness so important? It's because it's the insight that lets the whole thing make sense. If you don't have phonemic awareness, then you really have no means of figuring out how to read or spell words, right? No means of figuring it out yourself. The only means you have for learning them is rote memorization, which is tedious and inefficient. Maybe you can sound out words without blending, as in but so what, right? What good does that do? In contrast, if you do have phonemic awareness, then learning to read new words is easy, right? You have the mental Velcro to make them stick. And figuring out how to spell words is interesting. You guys you look around your class, those kids who get it have a ball doing inventive spelling, right? It's totally absorbing. It's the best part of the day because they're busy, right? All right. So, what I'd like to do then is just close with wrap it up with these thoughts. The first is that recent research really does affirm beyond the shadow of a doubt that children do need to learn and understand, need to understand, to read and spell words. And to do so, they really do need special help and practice, okay? They really do need to learn how to spell words and sound them. Next point is first grade. Again, here we have good news and bad news. The bad news, the scary part, is that how well children learn to read in first grade turns out to be terrifyingly important, okay? That's the bad news. The good news is that beginning reading seems remarkably indifferent to such innate and malleable background variables as, parental income or education or IQ handedness, right? Instead, beginning reading seems to be influenced by factors that have exactly and only to do with what the kids know about print and how it works. These are factors that we can and must teach away, right? Now, beyond first grade reading, I'd also like to say there's good news and bad news. The bad news is that from fourth grade and up, you find that unlike beginning reading, from fourth grade and up, you find that that reading ability does become pretty tightly correlated with measures like vocabulary and IQ and parental education, okay? That's the bad news. The good news is that it looks as though all of these factors wash out to the extent that you've persuaded the children to read, okay? That's our challenge.